What if I told you that the fate of all European civilization once hung in the balance, depending on the strength of the walls of a single fortress? In the summer of 1456, the world stood still in anticipation of the inevitable end, watching as a huge shadow from the east covered the last strongholds of Christianity. After the fall of Constantinople, it seemed that no force on earth could stop the victorious march of the young and ambitious Sultan Mehmed II. Europe was fragmented, frightened, and unprepared to resist, and its kings were preoccupied with internal strife, ignoring the approaching storm. The only obstacle in the path of the Ottoman war machine was the city of Belgrade, and a man whose name was renowned on the battlefield, but whose resources were negligible. This is not just a story about military strategy, but about the clash of two worlds, two beliefs, and two of the greatest personalities of their time. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how an army of simple peasants and monks was able to perform a miracle that may have given us the Europe we know today. What if I told you that everything European monarchs believed in turned out to be a dangerous illusion? In the middle of the 15th century, the fall of Constantinople was not just the loss of a city, but the collapse of a 1,000-year-old world order that seemed unshakable. Sultan Mehmed II, nicknamed the Conqueror, had no intention of stopping there, seeing Byzantium as only the first step toward world domination. His ambitions stretched far to the west, to Rome itself, which he dreamed of turning into the new capital of his empire. The Ottoman army was the most modern and disciplined force of its time, equipped with advanced artillery and fanatically loyal to its leader. Europe, meanwhile, was in a state of deep shock and political paralysis, unable to unite even in the face of total destruction. Diplomatic missions sent to the Sultan returned with frightening news of preparations for a campaign of unprecedented scale. Mehmed openly declared that his next target would be the Kingdom of Hungary, which served as the gateway to Central Europe. Belgrade, or Nándorfehérvár, as the Hungarians called it, was the key to this kingdom, a strategic castle at the confluence of the Danube and Sava rivers. The capture of this fortress opened a direct route to Buda and Vienna, making the further conquest of the continent a matter of technique. The Sultan assembled an army, the size of which, according to various estimates, reached 100,000 men, an astronomical figure for that era. At his disposal were elite Janissary troops, heavy Sipahi cavalry, and, most importantly, giant bombards capable of destroying any wall. The supply and ammunition trains stretched for many miles, raising columns of dust visible beyond the horizon. This was not just a military campaign, it was a solemn procession of power, confident in its invincibility. Mehmed personally led the campaign, wishing to secure his status as the greatest commander in history. Preparations for the siege were carried out with the mathematical precision characteristic of the Ottoman military machine, which did not overlook a single detail. The Sultan's engineers studied the plans of the fortress in advance, identifying weak points in the defenses and planning the placement of artillery batteries. Ahead of them lay weeks of hell, fire, and relentless attacks that could break anyone. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the role of personality in history? Can one person stop an empire? Write about it in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this epic story. Are you ready to learn the truth about the man whom the Sultan respected and hated more than anyone else in the world? János Hunyadi was not born a king, but his authority in the army was greater than that of the king. He rose from a simple nobleman to a powerful magnate and regent, tempering his character in endless border skirmishes. He devoted his entire life to fighting Ottoman expansion, studying the enemy's tactics, and adopting their best techniques. Hunyadi was one of the first European commanders to realize the importance of regular, disciplined infantry and firearms. His military career saw both brilliant victories and heavy defeats, which only made him stronger and wiser. He remembered the bitterness of defeat at Varna and Kosovo Field, where Christian armies suffered setbacks due to disunity and betrayal. These lessons taught him not to trust anyone and to rely only on proven people and his own intuition. Hunyadi was a pragmatist to the core, devoid of chivalrous illusions, understanding that war is hard work. He personally checked the readiness of the garrison, the quality of supplies, and the condition of the fortifications, not overlooking a single detail. In Belgrade, he appointed his brother-in-law Mihai Salati as commander, an experienced warrior whom he trusted as much as himself. The garrison of the fortress numbered only about 7,000 men, which was a drop in the ocean against the Ottoman horde. However, these were veterans who knew how to wield a sword and were ready to fight to the death. Hunyadi understood that these forces would only be enough to hold out for the first part, until reinforcements arrived. But the question of where these reinforcements would come from remained open and agonizing. While Europe stood idly by, Hunyadi assembled his own army, hiring soldiers with his own money and mortgaging his castles. He sent messengers to all corners of the country, calling on volunteers to join the defense of the borders. His name had a magical effect, attracting those who believed in his military genius and luck to his banner. He was ready to face his fate with several trump cards up his sleeve that the Sultan did not even suspect. What do you think is more important in a critical situation? Reliable allies behind you or faith in your own strength? In the next chapter, you will learn what unexpected weapon the defenders of Belgrade had at their disposal. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the Crusades? We usually imagine knights in shining armor, but a completely different force came to the walls of Belgrade. Pope Calixtus III declared a crusade, but the kings and princes of Europe ignored his call. Instead of regular armies, the 70-year-old Franciscan monk Giovanni da Capistrano went to Hungary's aid. With his incredible gift of persuasion and fanatical faith, he traveled through villages and towns, gathering ordinary people under his banner. It was an amazing and frightening sight. Thousands of peasants, artisans, students, and poor people who had left their homes. They were armed with scythes, axes, flails, and homemade pikes, with no military training. Their armor consisted of simple shirts, and their discipline was based solely on the authority of the old monk. Professional soldiers looked at this gathering with contempt and skepticism, calling them a herd going to slaughter. But in the eyes of these people burned a fire that was more terrifying than any weapon. Capistrano managed to gather a huge crowd of people, estimated at between 30 and 60,000. They flocked to Hunyadi's camp, creating enormous logistical problems as they had to be fed. However, Hunyadi, being a wise strategist, saw potential in this crowd that could be exploited. He understood that the fanaticism of these people could compensate for their lack of training and equipment. The voivode began to hastily teach them the basics of formation and interaction, trying to turn the crowd into something resembling an army. These people were willing to die for their faith, confident that a martyr's death would grant them a place in paradise. They feared neither cannons, nor janissaries, nor the Sultan himself, which made them an utterly unpredictable enemy. For the Ottomans, accustomed to fighting according to the rules of military science, the clash with such a mass of fanatics came as a shock. They did not understand the logic of the actions of these ragamuffins who threw themselves under bullets with prayers on their lips. It was a clash of two different mentalities, two different worlds. Capistrano kept up the spirits of his troops, preaching day and night and personally visiting the posts. He became the spiritual leader of the defense, balancing Hunyadi's military pragmatism with his religious fervor. This strange tandem, an experienced commander and a fanatical preacher, became the heart of Belgrade's defense. They often argued about tactics, but they were united on the main point. The city must not fall under any circumstances. Their collaboration became an example of how different forces can unite for a common goal. It was a unique moment of unity when class boundaries were erased in the face of common adversity. If you are inspired by the story of how the weak challenged the strong, be sure to like this video. Guess what happened next when the Sultan's monsters spoke? On July 4th, 1456, the bombardment of Belgrade began, which was unprecedented in its intensity. The Ottoman artillery, numbering hundreds of guns, opened a barrage of fire on the walls of the fortress. Among the cannons were giant bombards, similar to the one that destroyed the walls of Constantinople just 3 years earlier. The roar of the shots could be heard for tens of kilometers, and the earth shook as if there were an earthquake. Stone cannonballs weighing hundreds of kilograms crashed into the ancient masonry, turning it into dust and rubble. Clouds of dust obscured the sun, turning day into night, and the air was filled with smoke and the smell of sulfur. The defenders of the fortress watched in horror as their reliable fortifications melted away before their eyes under the methodical blows. The Sultan's engineers knew exactly what they were doing, concentrating their fire on key towers and sections of the wall. It seemed that nothing could withstand this destructive power. The garrison under the command of Mihai Salati showed remarkable resilience, repairing the breaches at night under the cover of darkness. They used sandbags, logs, and rubble to restore the line of defense. But with each passing day, the destruction became more extensive, and it became increasingly difficult to hold the outer perimeter. The Turkish artillery fire did not stop for a moment, exhausting the men physically and mentally. Sleep became a luxury, and the constant roar drove them mad. Sultan Mehmed watched the bombardment from his tent, confident that the city would soon fall. He saw the towers collapse and anticipated the moment when his janissaries would storm inside. For him, it was a demonstration of the technological superiority of the East over the West. Artillery became the main argument in the dispute between empires, changing the rules of warfare forever. Knightly valor was worthless against the mathematical calculations of ballistics. However, the walls of Belgrade, built on a rocky foundation, proved to be stronger than the Byzantine fortifications. They held out with their last ounce of strength, giving the defenders precious time to prepare their inner defenses. Hunyadi understood that the outer walls would fall sooner or later and prepared the city for street fighting. Every house was turned into a fortress, every street into a trap for the attackers. The defense plan changed on the fly, adapting to the destruction. The Ottomans did not limit themselves to shelling the walls, showering the city with incendiary shells. Fires broke out here and there, threatening to destroy food and gunpowder supplies. The city's inhabitants, including women and the elderly, extinguished the fires, helping the garrison to hold out. It was a struggle for survival in which everyone, young and old, took part. The common misfortune united the population and the soldiers into a single organism. But he did not know that the most terrible surprises awaited him ahead. How long can people stand where stone cannot withstand? In the next chapter, you will learn how water became a battlefield. But also the battle on the water. That hidden artery of war, often forgotten, but which decided the fate of cities no less than walls and towers. Sultan Mehmed II, an experienced commander and ruler of Constantinople, understood perfectly well that if he did not cut off river communications, Belgrade would be like a wound open to endless supplies of weapons, people, and hope. Therefore, when developing his plan for the siege, he bet on the Danube, the driving force of the region. The Sultan brought with him a fleet of 200 ships, ranging from light barges to heavy war galleys. On his orders, the ships were fastened together with heavy chains, forming an iron barrier on the river above the city. This chain barrier became a veritable wall on the water, cutting off the garrison from supplies and preventing any attempts to approach the fortress. The soldiers on the walls saw the morning mist spreading over the river, and behind it, a motionless line of Turkish ships, like a black wound on the silvery surface of the Danube. The city began to realize that if this barrier was not destroyed, Belgrade was doomed to a slow death. János Hunyadi, the renowned commander and defender of Hungary, camped upstream, closely watching the Sultan's every move. He understood the nature of siege better than most. A wall could withstand cannon fire, but a fortress would fall when hunger did more damage than cannonballs. Hunyadi realized that without breaking the river blockade, Belgrade was doomed. He assembled his own flotilla, small in number, but deadly in skilled hands. These were fast, maneuverable riverboats, ideal for attacking the large and heavy Ottoman ships. Serbian boatmen and fishermen, long familiar with the nature of the Danube, joined the Hungarians. They knew every shoal, every pit, and could tell by the sound of the water where the current was pushing the ship and where it was pulling it into a trap. Their knowledge of the river became the secret weapon that the Sultan had not taken into account in his calculations. On July 14th, when the sun rose above the horizon and the fog cleared, a grand river battle began. One of those that rarely make it into the pages of chronicles, but are capable of changing the course of a war. The Hungarian ships, catching a favorable wind, rushed forward. The sun reflected off their blades, and it seemed as if hundreds of dazzling sparks were flying down the river. Chaos ensued, the crack of breaking masts, the cries of the wounded, the clang of steel, the splashes of blood-stained water. The Christian ships attacked with the fury of people who had no right to be defeated. Their sailors clung to the sides of the Turkish galleys with boarding hooks, stormed the decks, and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The Turks, accustomed to naval battles, did not expect such swiftness. Their heavy ships, designed for the Mediterranean Sea, were helpless against the fast current of the Danube and the maneuverable ships of Hunyadi. Fire ships, small boats filled with resin, straw, and oil, played a special role. They were set on fire and released into the current. These burning projectiles rushed forward, crashing into the sides of Turkish ships and turning the water into a fiery labyrinth. The flames roared and swirled, engulfing the sails and masts. The Ottoman sailors rushed about, trying to extinguish the fire, but the strong wind fanned it even more. At the decisive moment, the Crusader troops stationed on the shore joined the battle. From land, they covered the Turkish flotilla with a hail of arrows, bolts, and cannon fire. It was crossfire from which the Ottomans had nowhere to hide. From above, fire from the shore, iron from below, the raging river. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the longest night in the history of Belgrade? On July 21st, at sunset, the general assault began. Sultan Mehmed threw his best forces into battle. The Janissary Corps, fanatically loyal and well-trained warriors. Under cover of artillery fire and drum beats, the Ottoman wave rolled over the ruined walls of the city. The defenders met the enemy with a barrage of arrows, stones, and boiling tar. But the Turks' numerical superiority was overwhelming. The Janissaries, disregarding their losses, climbed over the ruins of the walls and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The battle was fought for every meter, for every stone, turning into a bloody meat grinder. The cries of the combatants, the clang of steel, and the roar of explosions merged into a single hum that drowned out all thought. By nightfall, the Turks had managed to break through the outer line of defense and storm the streets of the city. It seemed that the battle was lost and the fall of the citadel was inevitable. Ottoman flags were already flying on the towers of the lower city, heralding the Sultan's victory. The defenders were pushed back to the citadel, where they prepared to fight their last battle. That night was a test of endurance for both sides. The Ottomans encountered resistance they had not expected, and the defenders fought beyond the limits of human capability. The air was thick with fear and fury. Who would emerge victorious from this nightmare? In the next chapter, you will learn how fire became an ally of the defenders. When the Janissaries filled the narrow streets of the lower town, Hunyadi gave an order that had been prepared in advance. The defenders began throwing bundles of brushwood soaked in sulfur and resin from the walls of the citadel and the roofs of houses. In an instant, these piles were set alight, and the city was transformed into a burning hell. The wall of fire cut off the Turkish vanguard from the main forces remaining behind the walls. The outbreak of fire sowed panic among the Janissaries, who found themselves trapped between the fire and the counter-attacking Hungarians. Hunyadi personally led his men in an attack from the citadel, crashing into the disorganized ranks of the enemy. In the narrow streets, the long Turkish guns and bows were useless, and swords and axes decided the outcome. The defenders, who knew every passageway, appeared as if from nowhere. The fire not only killed, but also created unbearable conditions. The smoke stung the eyes and the heat melted armor. The Turks, disoriented, rushed about in search of an exit, becoming easy prey. Those who tried to retreat to the walls ran into a wall of fire. The trap snapped shut, and the elite of the Sultan's army found themselves trapped. This tactical move by Hunyadi turned the tide of the night battle. The initiative passed to the defenders, who pressed the enemy with redoubled energy. By morning, the remnants of the Turkish troops had been driven out of the city or destroyed. The streets were littered with bodies and debris, but the Hungarian flag still flew over the citadel. The success of this counterattack was stunning, but it cost the defenders enormous effort. The garrison was exhausted, many were wounded, and supplies were running low. However, the psychological effect was enormous. The invincible Janissaries had fled. This instilled in the soldiers' hearts the belief that the Sultan could be defeated. The day after the failed assault, an event occurred that historians call a miracle or madness. While the commanders on both sides were planning their next moves, the initiative was seized by ordinary crusaders. Groups of militiamen, contrary to Hunyadi's order not to leave their positions, began to cross the river on their own initiative. They left the ruined city and attacked the Turkish positions. At first, these were minor skirmishes, which the Turkish commanders tried to suppress with light cavalry. But seeing the success of their comrades, more and more crusaders joined the attack. Capistrano, trying to stop the chaos and bring the men back into line, got into a boat and sailed towards them. But instead of obeying, the crowd carried him along with them, and the monk, raising his cross, led this spontaneous attack. It was not an organized offensive, it was an avalanche of human anger and faith. Thousands of poorly armed men ran fearlessly toward the Turkish cannons. The Ottomans were confused. They had expected the maneuvers of a regular army, not a frontal attack by a crowd. The artillerymen did not have time to reload their guns before their positions were overwhelmed by a wave of attackers. Hunyadi, watching the events from the walls, realized that the moment of truth had come. He could not leave the crusaders to their fate and ordered his heavy cavalry and the remnants of the garrison to support the attack. The sudden strike by regular troops on the flank of the Turkish army turned confusion into panic. What began as a breach of discipline turned into a brilliant, albeit accidental, maneuver. The Crusaders captured the Turkish artillery batteries and turned the cannons against the enemy. The Sultan's camp was in danger of being captured. The Janissaries tried to organize a defense, but were swept away by the onslaught of two armies, the peasant and noble armies. Chaos engulfed the entire battlefield, and the Turkish command collapsed. Seeing his once formidable army begin to crumble like dry clay under the rain, Sultan Mehmed II flew into a rage. He, the conqueror of Constantinople, the ruler of the crescent moon, the man before whom capitals trembled, could not believe his eyes. His army, trained, disciplined, armed with the best cannons of its time, was fleeing from a crowd of what he contemptuously thought were ragged crusaders, monks, and peasants, stirred up by the preaching of John of Capistrano. At that moment, anger clouded all thought. The Sultan did not wait for his commanders, did not give orders. He simply grabbed his saber, jumped on his horse, and, surrounded by his personal guard, rushed into the thick of battle. His purple cloak fluttered in the wind, and his voice drowned out the roar of battle. He shouted at his warriors, scolding them, urging them to remember their oath, their honor, their fear of Allah and of him, their Padishah. He personally crushed his enemies, showing that he was ready to die there, together with them. Even those who did not love the Sultan could not help but acknowledge his bravery. He was not a ruler on a throne, but a warrior fighting for his destiny. A fierce battle broke out around Mehmed. The Janissaries, who had always prided themselves on their steadfastness, saw that their master was in danger. They closed ranks, forming a mobile wall of shields and spears. The guards fought with desperate force, throwing back the Crusaders, trying to restore order in the chaos that was spreading across the battlefield. But the tide of battle had already turned. The pressure of the Hungarian cavalry, the sudden breakthrough of Capistrano's militia, and the general rise in morale among the Christians proved stronger than the Ottomans had expected. The front line faltered, like thin ice under the weight of footsteps. And then something happened that changed everything. Among the flying arrows, one found its target. It struck the Sultan in the thigh. Pain instantly pierced him. His leg buckled, and Mehmed, losing his balance, collapsed to the ground. His guards rushed to him in horror. Blood spread across the ground, mixing with dust and sweat. The Sultan tried to get up, but darkness clouded his eyes and he lost consciousness. The fall of the Padishah became a symbol of defeat. Rumors of his death spread through the ranks faster than the wind. The soldiers, already wavering, finally lost hope. Panic, at first localized, soon engulfed the entire army. The Janissaries, the Sultan's elite, were unable to maintain order for the first time in a long time. The bodyguards, risking their lives, lifted the unconscious ruler and carried him off the battlefield, shielding him with their shields. Seeing the catastrophe, the Grand Vizier gave a desperate order to retreat, to save what could still be saved. After the battle, the victor's camp was struck by an epidemic of plague, which often follows great wars. The disease spared no one, and János Hunyadi himself fell victim to it. He died on August 11, 1456, just 3 weeks after his greatest triumph. The great warrior passed away undefeated, leaving behind a saved country and a legend. Giovanni da Capistrano soon followed him. The two main heroes of the defense of Belgrade gave their lives, fulfilling their duty to the end. Their deaths overshadowed the joy of victory, but did not diminish its significance. Europe mourned its saviors, realizing the price that had been paid for peace. The significance of the victory at Belgrade cannot be overestimated. The Ottoman invasion of Central Europe was halted for 70 years. The Kingdom of Hungary gained a respite that allowed it to survive for almost another century. It was a strategic success that changed the course of the continent's history. In honor of the victory, Pope Calixtus III ordered church bells to be rung every day at noon. This tradition, known as the midday ringing, has been preserved in the Catholic world to this day. Every time you hear the bells ringing at noon, it is an echo of that great battle, a reminder of the feat of the defenders of Belgrade. The Belgrade fortress remained impregnable to the Turks until 1521. It became a symbol of the steadfastness and courage of the Hungarian and Serbian peoples. The memory of Hunyadi and Capistrano lives on in monuments, street names, and folk songs. They became national heroes, examples for future generations. We saw how despair turned into hope, an inevitable defeat into a legendary victory. The Siege of Belgrade in 1456 is not just a historical fact, it is a reminder of the power of the human spirit. János Hunyadi and his army proved that the impossible is possible if you believe in your cause and never give up. Their feat gave Europe decades of peace and preserved the cultural identity of the continent. Did you enjoy this story of heroism and self-sacrifice? What other forgotten but great battles of the past would you like to learn about? Write your suggestions in the comments and we will be sure to cover them in future episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories.